Go live in exactly. Good afternoon, everyone. A huge welcome back to those of you who've been with us for the past 2 days. I know everyone's really keen to chat here at the school, which is amazing. Actually, this is why we do this, so it's wonderful. I won't tell you off. Please come through and don't be afraid to sit at the front. We've got nearly 30 people with us on Zoom. Zoomers, please bear with us just another moment or two. Everyone's been busy grabbing coffee and chatting away. But it's wonderful to see the lecture theatre here at the school almost full on a Friday afternoon. And Mel was telling me just now, will anyone turn up at 3:30 on a Friday afternoon after 3 packed days? And what she doesn't realize is that I've deliberately saved the best for last. So this is actually, I'm using these 5 amazing individuals around me as the way to make sure that no one leaves the conference until the very end. So thank you, ladies, for helping me, and clearly it's worked. We've had 2 absolutely packed days. If I slightly stop making sense at any point, you'll just have to forgive me. But the good thing is that it's not going to be me doing most of the talking this afternoon. It's going to be this incredible panel of really, truly inspiring female leaders. And it's such an honor to be in their company. This is sadly the last formal session of the conference. The time's really just flown by. I honestly can't believe it. And yeah, I am getting a bit emotional, but it's not quite the end. So do not disappear after this talk. There are 2 more, yes, I'm not kidding, 2 more exciting things happening. From 5:30 p.m., we're going to be joined via video link by the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. Those of you who happen to live in the UK, I'm sure all know him, and I've had even a couple of my panelists saying how excited they are about the talk. So please stick around for this, even though Andy's not online, he's not in person, he'll be online. I'm sure it's going to be an incredible discussion. And after that, we're going to move on into our celebration gala. I think you've realized that the GoLab, we do like to work hard, but also have a little bit of fun. We had the pub quiz, we had, I think some people ended up in the Lamb and Flag yesterday evening, so I hear. We did the run this morning, and we're going to end with a really lovely celebration gala. And my colleague Emma in particular has been working so hard behind the scenes to put together a really wonderful video that brings together the highlights from the past 2 days. So if you want to see the video, stick around for that. More importantly, if you want to see the amazing photographs that John's been taking over the last 2 days, and I think you've seen the ones from last year, if you want to get your hand on those photos, you need to share your feedback with us. I know we've been frantically sharing feedback links in the Zoom chat, and let me tell you, I've checked, the response rate is not great. Everyone here for the past 2 days has been saying how important it is to capture evidence, data, adapt, learn. Guys, we need the evidence. So if you want the conference to get even better, please take 5 minutes on your way back home and share your thoughts with us. And you'll get our eternal gratitude and also a beautiful set of pictures. And so without further ado, let's dive into our discussion. So John, if you'd kindly take us to the next slide, actually. I just wanted to say a few words about the topic of the session, because those of you who are loyal followers of the conference, I think you will immediately recognize the fact that this is not a question that we're asking for the first time. How do we institutionalize outcomes? I think if we had a penny for every time we've heard this question asked, well, this whole be richer. And some of you might remember that it was Professor Heinrich actually 2 years ago who brought some hope into my life by responding to a challenge that was set out by Avnish, Nicole's colleague at Instiglia, who was saying, look, we've been doing results-based financing, outcomes-based contracting for 10, 15 years now, and we're still talking about pilots, we're still talking about experimentation. We need to go mainstream. We need to scale things up, whatever that means. And then Caroline so wisely encouraged us to take a step back. And I found that really refreshing. And her message, and Caroline, if I got it completely wrong, this is your chance to correct me, was to say that actually, we need to remind ourselves that these are questions that we've been asking since at least the 1800s. So these are not new challenges, and maybe even before then. So these are not new challenges, so we shouldn't despair that we haven't fully cracked it. And I was equally inspired by Caroline, because she also articulated really well all the ways in which we have made progress over the past 200 years. And obviously, we've made even more progress over the past 7 years since GoLab has started bringing us all together at Oxford. So there you go. And then there were other, on the same session 2 years ago, Louise Saville, who I think is in the room as well. Oh, thanks, Louise, for waving. She introduced a paper she just launched at the time that looked at social outcome contracts and system strengthening. And I would encourage you to go back and read that paper. But what stuck with me from that discussion and from Louise's contribution was the fact that she actually encouraged academics, or the scholars in the room, to go away and do more work, do more research to try to understand actually how can we move in a meaningful way in institutionalizing outcomes, in strengthening systems. And I appreciate they're not exactly the same thing. And then we also had the really brilliant discussion last year, where again we asked how do we make how do we catalyze lasting change? And Jonathan Ng, who's one of our visiting fellows of practice, was here with us on the panel. I don't know whether he's online. He might or might not be. But one of the things he mentioned that really stayed with me was that you need to work within the system, work within the bureaucracy. And I think at that point, Annetta got really excited. She started, I think, what ended up being at least a year-long conversation with Jonathan. And earlier this year, actually in preparation for the conference, in some ways, they recorded this really thought-provoking podcast episode, which was curated by my colleague Harry. So I've put a little snapshot of the podcast in here, and I would really encourage you all to go. Again, maybe on your way back home, you can listen to the podcast. So here you are. There's a bit of context as to, I guess, how we got here. Why are we still asking these questions? I guess for me, it's because we still haven't fully cracked it, but there's also a part of me that thinks, or maybe have we asked all the right questions? And Amel, the discussions we've been having together really got me to think, no, maybe there are things that we haven't fully explored yet. So in the panel this afternoon, and John, feel free to move us on to the next slide. I don't want us to spend quite as much time discussing the barriers or the issues, not because they're not important, and I'm sure we'll inevitably touch upon them, but I think it's because we've touched upon them so many times already, and actually throughout the past 2 days, they came up in a lot of our discussions. So ladies, you are here to provide me with answers, take me out of my misery. So what we want to do is really look at some examples of successful practice, and I suppose also maybe imperfect practice, and understand where the learning has been. And then, as I was saying, I think in particular with Amel, I'm keen to look at some of these elements that maybe we've been overlooking, or elements where we need to pay closer attention. And then with Aneta and Rafael, I want to go back to this question of, do you work within bureaucracies? Do you seek that incremental change? Or do you create the incentives for a burning platform? So yeah, that's what we're going to be discussing. I think everyone here knows you, but as I come to each one of you, I'll invite you to just briefly introduce yourselves before diving into the discussion. Before we do that, I want to do one more thing. It's just to make sure that everyone in the audience is alert, is paying attention, is fully switched on. Ji-Hung already has his phone out, so I will assume I'm watching you even as I'm moderating. I'll assume that was to go ahead and scan the QR code. Of course, you know how it works. And then you will find a question in there for you. For you all, not just for Ji-Hung, just to clarify. Yes, John, if you want to show the question so that our panelists can see it as well. So the question is, for anyone who can't see the screen, is what does institutionalizing outcomes mean to you? And I wanted to get that out of the way because I'm fairly sure it means at least slightly different things to different people. And I see someone's put here mainstreaming of OBF, so outcomes-based funding. And I think maybe that's something, if we get a chance to reflect on the panel, because I think I personally do make a distinction between institutionalizing outcomes and institutionalizing or mainstreaming outcomes-based financing. So it'd be great to have our panelists' thoughts on that. Someone said not a lot. Please put your, yeah, honest and let's hope we can come back to that in the discussion. Bureaucratic buy-in, fantastic. Setting long-term standardized outcomes.
The same person who said not a
lot. Okay, fantastic. Well, you can. We'll keep this slide open for just a little bit longer. We've actually, just to warn you, prepared a couple of other questions for our audience just to keep you on your toes. But let's dive into the discussion. And Rodana, I'll start with you. What does institutionalizing outcomes mean for you, for the government department you're part of?
What does institutionalizing outcome mean? Do you want me to do my introduction or just do a quick answer?
No, let's do intro and then feel free to answer my question as part of the wider remarks.
Part of all that, thank you. I'll get to it at the end then, if that's okay. Hello, everybody. Lovely to be with you on a Friday afternoon. My name is Rodana Tona. I lead the Impact Investment team in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. I really caught the outcomes-based financing, I want to say bug, but that's more negative, spark maybe, quite early in my career through work on the UK domestic SIBS market in then the Cabinet Office, and then have been doing similar work in the international development sphere for about the last 8 years or so. So taking what is now the FCDO from piloting impact bonds to then taking outcomes-based financing instruments to scale. And really what I wanted to talk to you about today has been some of my experiences on the journey, kind of from initial pilots to scale, some of the barriers, but really not spending too much time on those, and a lot more on, well, what can we do? What's next for us as an organization? And how do we really institutionalize outcomes, or an outcome sort of thinking for us? So in talking about our scaling efforts, really, I want to take you to that kind of I want to say inflection point, or what we thought was the inflection point in between piloting and delivering at scale. And for us, that was about 2019-20, where we had a lot of working in our favor. We'd had a pilot program supporting 3 Impact 1 projects, a lot of evidence already emerging, although they were still underway. We had a lot of senior support and excitement in the organization, where people directly up the food chain, but also some of our non-executive directors sort of sitting down with us saying, there's no point doing what you're doing if you don't have a pathway to scale. So think big, be ambitious. We'd had what we thought was a great pipeline of projects and a great market of increasingly interested service providers, and investors were circling as well. So we designed this, what we thought, quite a versatile outcomes-based financing program, right? Not focusing on impact bonds or a particular instrument design, but really saying, well, look, we want to see where in our aid spending we can drive outcomes better through sort of a range of outcomes-based financing instruments. And we were also pragmatic about it. We went public and made sure that a minister included a reference to that program in their announcement. It was about kind of early 2020. Those of you who have experience working in government will probably know that just sort of means a lot. Once a thing is in the public domain, you're a little bit more committed. So 5 years on, how are we doing? Not so well, as you'll see from the title of this presentation. Let me just take you through a few numbers from the kind of financial planning that we did then for the project, and let you kind of see for yourself. So back then we'd said, well, look, we think based on sort of what we're seeing in the market, over the next 7 or so years, we can probably support 3 to 5 funds in education, another 2 or 3 in poverty graduation, another 2 or 3 in water and sanitation, because that's what the market is telling us is there kind of being developed. So overall, between sort of 7 and 11 funds, quite a range, but still. And a bit of wiggle room in terms of the funding for working on other areas. Climate change was emerging, a bunch of interesting instruments in nature as well. As of 2024, so 5 years into a 7-year program, out of the 7 to 11, we have 2 outcomes funds, both of them in education, and both thanks to the very, very hard work of Amel's team and a lot of support and buy-in from our education colleagues. So I don't want to be unkind to us. We've also supported a lot of FCDO's teams in piloting smaller projects. We run what we think is a successful outcomes accelerator that's providing early seed funding to designing more instruments. But that's still early seed funding, right? That's still, I think, the title of this session was moving on beyond pilotitis, beyond being stuck in this cycle of all you can ever do is relatively small programming. Part of it wants me to kind of chalk up to, only still being at 2, to just a really challenging fiscal situation, lots of political change, and kind of move on and hope we do better. But another part of me, though, wants to, and I think Tina, in her first presentation of the conference, referred to this very aptly as kind of embracing the suck and really try to kind of poke around and analyze a little bit as to kind of why we failed. My working theory, and what I want to put to you today, has been that we've perhaps over-relied on what the evidence was telling, and producing really great quality evidence, which nonetheless is important, and engaging the market and, essentially impressing colleagues with the numbers and saying, look, this can work. There's a bunch of instruments that can work, lots of fantastic organizations. We hadn't done enough work on the sort of institutional change, right? So in really figuring out how are the performance incentives working for our colleagues within the organization to support us in launching Outcomes Fund? What incentive does my water and sanitation colleague have to go and support me in really, getting the early design and helping me fund it and helping me get to like, yes, we will fund this and we will deliver kind of a meaningful amount of funding to a project to operate efficiently and effectively. So, where are the templates? Where are the nudges across the program cycle that enable colleagues to go and think in an outcomes-based way, not necessarily always land at this must be an outcomes fund, but at least consider it, because I'm still even missing the consideration of like, yeah, here is our options assessment. One of them was RBF, and we decided not to, but we've engaged with the impact team on it. So I think what's next for me is like the challenge of adapting the organization so that those using or at least encountering outcomes-based instruments and ideas don't feel like they're taking a huge risk with them, that they're finding it a little bit easier. And that, for me, is what institutionalizing outcomes means, right? Where your colleagues that kind of interact with organizations from coming in from the outside, or that are thinking about how we design, do consider outcomes rather than necessarily returning to an inputs-based grant. So that's the challenge, but it throws up questions for me on how to do it, who's best to do it, how fast will we do it so that we don't end up kind of over-promising, under-delivering again. And also, and maybe for the discussion and question later, what am I missing, right? This is just another theory of what maybe would have worked, but there may be other things. So on how to do it and who's best to do it, and not to take too much of the chair's role, I know Nicole, and I'm really interested to speak to you about that, to sort of the institutional change. And I know you and Instiglio have done a lot of work with organizations as well. So yeah, that's it for me for now.
Wow, Rodana, that was brilliant. And I think we've set up a slider with your question. Actually, I think you've set a question to our audience. So John is nodding. We have that ready to share. Maybe
that might be after Nicole.
After, okay, we'll keep it for later. No worries. But yeah, I mean, and I have to say, if we go back to the previous slide with the title of the submission actually you've made in response to our call for papers, and when I saw it, I was like, wow, failure to impress. Why has replicating outcomes been much slower than hoped? I was like, wow, who would be so bold as to submit this for the conference? And now you're at Oxford University and you're asking whether we've overly relied on the evidence. So. But I gather that you're not really saying that we don't need the evidence, but that it's not enough. And that's sort of like, I guess, what we sometimes hear is we'll do a pilot, we'll capture the data, we'll build the evidence, and then thousands more projects will.
Yeah, it's a necessary but not a sufficient condition, right, for you to move on. And I think like it seems so stupid talking about it now when you sort of turn back 2020 hindsight and think, well, that was obvious. The only assumption that we'd made in our theory of change about evidence is, what if the evidence comes out and says it's either inconclusive or says, oh, these things might not be as great as you thought? We hadn't really thought about the assumption we were making on evidence will not just impress people, but also inspire them to take a look at what outcomes-based delivery would mean. So yeah, no, absolutely. I'm not about to turn to a bunch of academics and say evidence is worthless. But yeah, you need more. And I think that's a lot of the work you do and work with practitioners as well, right, is to translate it into action, which definitely doesn't come easy.
Fantastic, thank you. So let's move on to Nicole. Nicole, do introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Nicole Flock. I'm an associate partner at Instiglio, and we work with governments and donors to help them institutionalize an outcomes-based mindset. What that means, I think being set up in terms of the systems, processes, incentives to prioritize outcomes, to prioritize impact in the day-to-day decision-making, to use data. And when I, 10 years ago, I was at the university and I was learning. So I have a background in banking and financial institutions and auditing, and eventually decided I wanted to do something more useful with my life and, go in the international development space. I did my master's in international development, learned about RCTs, and I was like, oh, wow, learning how it was like revolutionizing international development. And then towards the end of the master, a professor mentioned social impact bonds. And I was like, oh, that's fantastic. That's a great combination of, I have worked in bonds, now that's combined with social outcomes. That must be the right fit for me, right?
Did no one tell you a social impact bond? It's not actually a bond.
Exactly. So I was like learning about that then. But yeah, I got a little bit to know about payment by results. And I was like, yeah, that's the next big thing. It's such a simple, sensible idea. It's going to take off and it's going to revolutionize international development. So I was sure about that and wanted to join that movement. And yeah, 9 years later, roughly, it is still a simple idea, but it's actually, I've learned over the last 9 years working in the space that it is actually a very significant departure from business as usual. It is not as easy. I mean, there are many different reasons, I think, that we have been discussing here at the conference throughout the last 2 days. Like, it's not that easy to measure some outcomes. It's not that easy to set targets for some projects or programs. We have learned about the cloud problem, which makes that even more difficult, where we don't know what the solution is. So how can we say what the targets or the prices are to achieve outcomes? We have learned, or I had no idea before, but the annual budget cycles that stand in the way of like paying for results, and the political disincentives as well, because we really, draw the attention to the results, and decision makers are on the spot. Are you getting to those results, right? And sometimes have disincentives because actually they are not going to disperse the funding, and their funding is going to be cut next year. So there are real disincentives to using that idea of paying for results. And so a little bit like what we have been like thinking about is like, so how does that journey look like? And I think we have maybe one slide on that journey. Thinking about like, just like basically realizing it takes time. It's an innovation. It takes time to learn and fine tune it. It takes time to create evidence, but it takes time to take that evidence and actually influence policymakers. And it takes time to build the capabilities in an organization to actually do payment by results well. And so the two levels that we've been thinking about, you don't have it?
I think Maria has it. Sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Just bear another minute.
No, all good. So it's like, it's nothing revolutionary either. It's just like a little bit of framework that maps out that scaling pathway, and we are thinking about it at two different levels. The first level is like, for example, in a country, how does that look like from like piloting to institutionalizing payment by results mechanism, right? So initially you pilot, so you learn things, you replicate it. Eventually, maybe there are more actors in your space that are replicating the same practices. Maybe then mainstreaming is about bringing it to new sectors, new actors, new applications. And then eventually, like the institutionalization is really when we think that results-based financing is anchored in national legislation. It's supported by like ministries of finance. You have a dedicated unit maybe on RBF, similar to how we have right now M&E units. Why not have a unit that advises the government on practices, results-based practices? Doesn't need to be just payment by results, right? But like really how to focus on policy implementation and putting the right incentives in place. And then I think the other part that we are discussing a little bit more today, I think the second level is about how does that journey look like in a donor organization. Often, it's like initially like champion-led. I think earlier this year, Afnish used the term, the crazy people who are saying, let me try and go on that journey. And after that, like maybe there's a community of practice, but really unless there is a formalized kind of budgeted, staffed, structurally supported kind of unit that is supporting that change within the organization, you probably don't get to like, you don't get to institutionalize. So on the next slide, we have then been thinking like working with like different donors, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, for example, the Global Fund, the Swiss Development Corporation, a little bit with FCDO as well on, so how do we support that journey? How do we support that pathway to scale? From pilot to using at scale. And so that slide here just is like a really simplified framework, high level. What are the kind of like key ingredients or enabling factors that can really support this, right? And you talked a lot about the first one in terms of evidence and demonstration, and that's obviously important. You need to have that evidence. It needs to be relevant. So something that, for example, we have experienced is that even though you have evidence in one sector, let's say health, the education team is still like, oh, but I don't know, like if this is going to work in my sector as well. So evidence that is relevant, like to the specific context, high income countries, low income countries, people already say, oh, but this can work in a high income country, but in a low income country where maybe data systems are not developed, what about how is it working there? So you do need to invest quite a bit, I think, in this evidence generation to build a compelling case. And it's also not quite easy, I think, to sometimes tease out what is actually the change that payment by results affected it. But beyond that evidence, I think as well, are a few other factors. So internal sponsorship, buy-in, and incentives across different departments from different stakeholders. So one of the stakeholders are actually that we have come to appreciate that we need to work with from the get-go are the risks, legal, finance departments, right? Because you are actually proposing a significant shift to how they currently operate. So bring them on board from the get-go and understand what is your current practice, what are your current incentives as well, and how can we work together? And when working with the Millennium Challenge Corporation for a couple of years on their journey of like institution or like scaling results-based financing, that's what we did, and we put together like a reference group that had like different people from different departments to kind of advise us. But even for the frontline or like the programmatic staff, the incentives are often not in place. They have very limited bandwidth, and you are coming with an excellent idea and you're telling them, well, after like you're working 40, 50 hours a week and you have a lot on, like, why don't you try something new with me that takes another day in your week? And well, no, like you just have to do that on top of your current workload, right? So it's like, it's a real disincentive in a way. And then often in institutions, the incentives are also set in different ways. Disbursement, mitigating any risks, reputational risks, financial risks. So that's something like really important, I think, to think through of like what you need in order to go from pilot to scale. Capacity, knowledge, expertise. Really interesting when we worked, when we did a review for the Swiss Development Corporation, SECO and SDC, to identify in all of their portfolios their experience with results-based financing. We realized they had 51 experiences. No one was aware about that before, like across different departments. And they had quite a bit of capacity, quite a bit of lessons learned and best practices, quite a few champions who were actually like driving this within the organization, but there was no like bringing them together in consolidation. And so everyone was quite excited to see that. And we had a workshop and they were like, oh, you're working in this too? Really interesting. And so how can we learn from each other? I don't know how I'm doing on time, so maybe should I stop here?
We can keep going for another minute if otherwise.
Maybe then just like quick reflections a little bit on what's next. I guess that was also a question you were asking, right? And from reflecting a little bit from what I've heard in this conference as well, I think one, it is really important to really drive to scale, to mainstream and scale results-based financing. I think we need to invest in data, technology, and measurement, because I think unless we can do that at a low cost and with a high reliability, it's going to be difficult in the future to really justify that switch to payment by results. But I think we also need to rethink how do we measure success in those cloud problems where we don't know the outcomes? And are there other ways of capturing success and saying, really what we want is to see that actors on the ground have the incentives and make the best decisions based on the information that they have available and with the intention to maximize outcomes. And what would be a measure here? Yeah, let me stop here.
Yeah, I do have a quick question. I'm just intrigued. I mean, it's hard to disagree with any of the things you've included on the super helpful diagram in terms of the evidence generation, the kind of getting the sponsorship, the capacity building, which is something that you've emphasized. But how did you do? I imagine, was there no pushback from the organizations you worked with around the kind of investment, the cost of achieving all these things? Because I'm, very much thinking, for example, in UK context where, yes, it's great, but money is tight. So how do you make that initial case in the first place for that investment in the data infrastructure and all the other elements?
That's actually a central question. Yeah, I think that's why I think we have. I mean, why we have seen some institutions taking this on, such as the Millennium Challenge Corporation. They have seen successful pilots in Morocco and Sierra Leone, and they were like, okay, we want to invest in a 4-year strategy, and they just actually renewed their commitment to go another 4 years to really explore this and put the money behind it. But I agree, in many other organizations, the conversation is, oh, but we don't have money to invest in operational excellence and getting better. And I think that's where this arrow comes in, what are the drivers that actually motivate innovation and drives this whole scaling process and the investments and these enabling factors forward? And do we have that external pressure and the oversight bodies that are saying to public institutions, governments, but also donors, we want you to achieve impact, and until that happens, and there's a bit a higher prioritization of that, it's difficult to justify the investments, I think.
Thank you. No, that was brilliant. And we'll come back to this question around the drivers that motivate that innovation. Amel, can I turn to you next? I know these are questions that you've been thinking about very deeply for a really long time. And, before the Education Outcome Fund, I know you spent time in the private sector. You're obviously also a minister in the government of Tunisia. I think if there's anyone who can help us move a little bit closer towards more clarity on these questions around institutionalizing outcomes with a sense of realism and perspective, it's you.
Oh, thanks so much. A big challenge. So, my name is Amel. I'm CEO of the Education Outcomes Fund, which is now a UN-hosted trust fund that hopes to change, learning and employment outcomes for children and youth globally. And so the first thing I want to put here is this morning when she's introduced the definition of outcomes fund, for me, something big has been missing, which is, I think these are massive change and transformation initiatives. And I feel like James Icarus, as he is here online today, when they did the review of all the development impact bonds, I think in the summary at the end, they said that, we heard it more over the last 2 days, but I never see this massively as a central thing. And we talk more about partnership. I think we don't talk enough about these are big change and transformation initiatives and have to be led and implemented and designed as such. And I'm going to say something about it. We had the metaphor that Tanya gave us of cloud, and clock problems, kind of very structured, A, B, C, D brings you to paradise versus very messy and ambiguous problems. I think what we are doing is a double cloud, because the problems we're solving are cloud problems, but the way we're solving them, doing an outcomes fund and outcomes is also a cloud, And so in a way, it's deeply about behavior and culture change, I think both externally and internally. So externally, I think Richard here from Save the Children is here. I would encourage you, there he is, to read their blog. They wrote a blog about how actually having been on the receiving end of the funding where we work together in Sierra Leone has actually changed the way they work, talking from normally doing baseline, midline, endline, and now kind of almost real-time data, and that kind of really course correction regularly, and SAVE is an amazing organization that delivers for children, and even they kind of feel there's been a really big transformation, I think for governments as well, that's why I disagree with Tanya maybe when she said despite leadership. I think doing a cloud with a cloud does need courageous leadership, and because we are asking them to do something outside of the status quo, from buying outcomes. Most government in the world can only buy services, consulting, whatever, or goods, buildings, books. They don't buy outcomes. So that we have spent almost 2 years, actually with the support of Freshfield, which have been amazing support, and other law firms, to create actually contracts that government. So we have now a few governments that can buy outcomes. In all our projects also, we insist that the government, even if they're a low-income country, put their own money, skin in the game, in cash as part of the outcomes funding, because that takes them, because it has to go to cabinet, because they have to talk with the Ministry of Finance and Treasury, because that conversation has to happen, that we have extremely limited resources and we really want to put these behind that. And that needs kind of a lot of leadership. And I don't believe, I know this might sound provocative, I don't believe evidence changes politician decisions. I like, if you look at delivery units, for example, there was an example in the UK, and then Malaysia took it over. And I had a conversation with Michael Barber, with whom I sit together on a board. And I was like, when did it kick out? And he's like, it was very weird. IFC or World Bank meeting, they wrote actually an article about our delivery unit. And then Malaysia reached out, and then they did it. And suddenly everyone was doing it. And interestingly, and I hope he doesn't get upset with me saying this, when we looked at delivery units, all over, I think 28 countries have done them in education. Almost none of them had learning outcomes as results, And so the evidence behind actually delivery being a good thing to do is very little, There is a way to do them well, but I don't think that evidence is what drives politicians. And I'm going to say something maybe later about it. So thinking we're going to do projects and they're going to deliver results and they're going to drive everyone else to do more of it, no, I think also internally for us, we have to see this as a big change program. So we have run a lot of change management courses internally because I feel like a lot in the ecosystem see themselves passionate about content, about the technical. Yes, we should do a design that doesn't create perverse incentive. Yeah, we should think about what triggers payment. But I feel like anyone who works in this area should see themselves as change agents. They should understand what a change curve is, that different stakeholders go through this change curve at different times. That will explain to you why you feel you're already ahead. You've talked about this a million times and you have someone saying, what the hell is this, and why are we doing it, You should learn about stakeholder management. There are a million tools out there. You should learn about relationship and conflict mediation. You should learn about community of practice and how to build them. We've had internally a lot. We have every 2 weeks a learning agenda, and we have learning courses around all these things. And interestingly, I get invited all the time. I'm invited next Monday to talk actually to the top leadership of Siemens Energy about change and transformation. Very rarely governments invite me to talk about change and transformation, which I find quite interesting. And so if this is a change and transformation initiative, on the other side, the evidence that we have, you can look at McKinsey studies and others, say 70% of change initiatives fail. Only 30% succeed. And gives you, there are a lot of tools out there that what you have to do to make them succeed. And I think over the last 2 days, some people shared some of those. But before I go to the complete solution, I would say, okay, if we're doing a change and transformation, why the hell actually do we need a change and transformation? And what are we comparing what we do to, because that's Radana has been one of these courageous leaders, in this space, to push this. But maybe we have to be kinder to ourselves, I find, because what are we comparing to both on the micro and macro level? Micro level, what are we calling our programs and projects to? Are we comparing them to some ideal, unreal, I've never seen one of, procurement or grant through government that has been massively thought through, where all stakeholders have been invited, where everyone knew what the outcomes are, where everyone thought about perverse incentives, where there was a very transparent RFP, where there was a massive due diligence done on all the providers, okay, where we made sure that there is a community of practice, where we invested in all the evaluation and monitoring costs and done it maybe even an RCT, yeah, and where there was a massively committed team to kind of make sure that the participants or beneficiary were there. Okay, if that exists, we don't need to do outcomes partnerships, you know? And so, or you compare me to Treasury or Ministry of Finance budgets that everyone knows is bogus. Honestly, I was cabinet minister, okay? We knew that these budgets are bogus. You know, they're based on unrealistic growth, you know, prescriptions. They kind of, we know they're not gonna hold and we still have them, you know? So if you you know, so the question is, we should compare ourselves to the status quo. The status quo in education, 73% of the children can't read and write at age 10 in the world, okay? The status quo, and not only in low and middle income countries, the status quo in this country is that early children can, I mean, I have children in this country, early childcare has been outsourced, you know, to companies, private equity firms, they're making profits and the children development is very dismissal, you know? The status quo is in Tunisia, is with my country, is a very famous development bank, did a skills program with young people. Yes, because I'm tired to hear this is complex and long, you know. It was very fast, was in a week done. The results, these young people went through the skills program. They were unemployed, marginalized young people who had informal jobs, were taken out of these informal jobs. They were in 1-year program, skill program. At the end of the skills program, 8% of them were in jobs, which means 92% of them not only didn't have a job, they didn't have a diploma in a country that actually focused a lot on diploma, so that kind of skill training was bogus, yeah, and lost a year of income for their family. And that was a program that was done really fast, you know, not complex and taking 12 months to design like we do, yeah? And so for me, it's like, what are we comparing ourselves to, you know? So I want to be challenged based on the status quo. I'm not saying the benchmark has to be low, no. And my team is here, like 4 of them are here. They know as a CEO, I'm always challenging that it has to become easier, it has to become faster, yeah? But human problems are complex problems, you know? And having a philanthropic waking tomorrow morning and thinking they're gonna change the world and give the money in 2 hours, you know, to something, a second chance program that has been zero thought through is actually more damaging to our society than it's helpful. And so I want to be compared to the status quo, not to some ideal that doesn't exist. And on the macro level, for me, is an important also narrative that we all should share is, are we being unrealistic? I love the 18th century analogy. If you look at cash transfer, for example, even conditional cash transfer, they started, I think, in the 90s with Mexico, and Progressa, I think it was called at the beginning, and then Bolsa Familia in Brazil. It took another 10 years until they were started in, you know, South Africa and South Asia, and then another 10 years until they were used in the humanitarian sectors, and then in COVID, they became also a big thing in high-income countries. So around 30 years for mainstreaming. So while I'm not sitting and thinking we're doing great, you know, I mean, as CEO, you're always driven by dissatisfaction, sadly. But, you know, it's just like I'm saying, okay, maybe we're 10 years down the line or 15 years out of a 30 or 40 years. And even today, I met someone from India here and she said like, we had a cash transfer program, but I'm not really sure it was. Like even today, after 30 years, it's there. Or look at RCTs in development. How long it took for them to become mainstream. And so again, can we compare ourselves to bigger you know, trends out there rather than thinking we should have all done this yesterday? So what do we need if these are big change programs, if we need to compare ourselves to the status quo, and if basically we are part of a larger journey of government delivering better for the citizen and struggling doing so actually worldwide? For me, I mean, some of what you said, Nicole, is part of the solution. For me, doing big programs. I hate pilots. I refuse to do pilots. We had UF offers of people wanting to do like smaller programs, 1 million, 5 million. We said no. Having been cabinet minister, trust me, everyone can do anything with 50 schools or with 500 kids, you know? But with the moment you want to do it with 10 million, you can never scale from, that to 10 million, So you'll be stuck in pilots for the rest of your life, and you will never scale. So for me, it's like at EUF, we really focused, and it has been super hard to only do things at the scale that is kind of important enough, where we are in all districts, all over the countries, at a certain number, like in the hundreds of thousands of children, to be able then hopefully to scale it to millions of children, because that's where you learn. You don't learn with 50 schools, or 100 schools of, 100 hospitals, maybe hospital 100 is bigger. So doing big programs and refusing to do pilots, because we've had enough of those, For me, the public good bit is really important. So what we're struggling with is also all the R&D right now, because another critique for the work we do is like, oh, value for money, it's expensive, okay? All the R&D we're doing right now, we're doing it as on the back end of programs. So for example, I'll give an example, Rwanda, or we have in Rwanda, Sierra Leone, and South Africa, we have to do early childhood programs, yeah? And how to measure early children development in low-income country is something that doesn't really exist ready, made off the shelf. So it was work of 6 months where we took like advisors from all over the world who eat and breathe measurement tools for early childhood. We hired experts from the country where we work in who've done measurements, even if it wasn't in early childhood, but at least went to rural areas and did the measurement, because we work with last mile kids. And then 2 people from our team to kind of develop that. And it took 6 months. And I'm sure we're going to learn a lot while we implement it. And then that makes our value for money suck. Yeah, I mean, but it's like asking Toyota, to spend the R&D they do for a new model to kind of spread it over the first 100 cars they sell. I mean, they're going to spread it over 1 million cars, And so what we do now is then we scratch a bit of money from our, unrestricted funding, which is like gold nuggets, which hard to, raise. We had one great partner, Lego Foundation, who did invest money into this kind of, knowledge building. R&D piece, but there is very little out there. So I refuse actually to put the R&D into the value for money. And you shouldn't count it in your project and your price per outcome, because that actually is totally unfair. So, that's for me kind of the core thing, to develop knowledge, to develop the networks, to do capacity building, everything we do, but maybe we need a JPAL for, outcomes on. I know that GoLab is trying, Brookings is trying, but we didn't really have someone put a massive amount of resources. We try to be a center of excellence with whatever we can, but we get calls from many countries, and sometimes we can't even answer those because we have to deliver on the ground. We can only do as much pro bono, even paid as we can. So 3 summary, what we need courageous leadership, because of these big transformation projects, and we need people in them to see themselves a change agent. We need a sustained commitment over decades, and we are at the start. When I started this project, one of my co-founders, Jared Lee, that some of you may know, he's like, oh man, it's going to take us 1 year or 2 to launch. And I was like, it's going to take us 10 years to launch this. And the third is really appropriate resourcing of these public goods and R&D. And the last point, what do we compare ourselves to? Let's compare ourselves to the fucked up status quo. Sorry to say so. I do care about citizens. I'm crazy. I do care about governments delivering better for citizens. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this job. And compare and be kind of kind to ourselves, seeing ourselves as a part of a kind of 100-year journey.
Well, that was incredible. You've also done my job. You've beautifully synthesized your points and your message to our community of practitioners and scholars and government officials. And I think your remarks had relevant, calls to action to each of these communities. You've mentioned quite a few times in your remarks the need to change the narratives across different levels, both I think what we tell ourselves about how fast and how far we can go. But I think also in terms of kind of how we engage with politicians, with civil servants and so on. And Rafaela, that brings me to you, because I know that's something that you feel really strongly about. So again, please do introduce yourself for anyone who might not know you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Andrea. And well, thank you to everyone in this panel and to everyone who contributed to this today's, because I mean, to be honest, it's not easy to speak after these today's and after these panelists. Anyway, Nice to know you. I'm Raffaella. I work at the GSG Impact, which is this global organization that wants to push impact investing. We work across 44 countries in the world, and our mission is to create impact investing ecosystems. So it's been 2 years that together with Bridges Outcome Partnerships and thanks to our amazing policy team, we have been working on this research to understand how can we scale, how can we finally unlock the potential of social outcome partnerships. And I think many things have already been said among this audience during these 2 days. So I really don't want to repeat things. What I want to do is perhaps just to reorganize a few things that have been said using the same frameworks that we have used. And I have a good news. I mean, I think that for all the challenges that we raised, we also have the solutions. So perhaps for us now, it's more to reflect what Amel was brilliantly doing, reflect on how do we transition as fast as possible to these solutions. But let me start from the beginning. I think during our interviews, we interviewed more than 20 countries, 20 organizations representing countries, impact ecosystems. And we analyzed several challenges that can be grouped in 3 different sets, mostly. Institutional challenges, things that we heard also during these 2 days, the difficulties that we found working with governments. So, for instance, the budgeting, the annual budgeting, or the strict regulatory frameworks, the capacity building, the data availability, and for all of this, we heard also solutions now. So we need multi-annual programs. So it is doable just funding outcome funds, for instance, or co-funding programs in terms of the regulation frameworks or the skills. We have amazing examples, for example, in UK of creating, or in Portugal of creating a proper unit that are going to work on this, so are providing those skills or the data, and also reflecting more on breaking down the objectives or creating platforms, sharing more data. So these are all examples. I think now we have enough experience to surpass and to do more from an institutional point of view. Then there are the set of challenges related more to the political part, the political support. And that's what Nick was saying. He was able to create the civil society unit and to work so focused on that thanks to the mandate. What we heard that has worked, I mean, because that seems to be the most difficult thing now, and probably is to shift the narrative along to get that political support, because that's not give me the problem, I'm going to solve it. It's more, we do it together. This is additional. So this will provide you the solutions that otherwise you won't be able to do alone. This will make happen things that won't happen otherwise. So I'm thinking to, for example, investing in new sector, investing in prevention, or release the possibility to release new resources thanks to these programs, because there is a possibility to provide savings for the public administration. Scaling, of course, what works, because it allows you to find what is working and scaling it. And that's everything related to political support. And then we go to probably the most difficult one, the perception. It is perceived as something incredibly complex, or as something that is incompatible, public-private working together, public-private plus civil society organization, even more difficult. And for that, I would say, and probably something that even Amel was saying along the lines, is go back to our shared ambition, go back to the big picture. What do we want to achieve together? Go back to our main objective, which is changing the system. So we will all work together to do that. So as I was saying, these are all the solutions that I have heard also during these 2 days. Now, how do we actually transition from these to to implement this solution, no? To say, okay, now we actually unlock. How do we transform the learnings from all the institutional work? How do we ensure that the message for the political support is there? How do we achieve this common vision, this common sense? Well, perhaps I'm saying something that is really clear to everyone. I don't know, sorry, but I want to repeat it, and I would like to go outside and say it loud. I think we need bigger, longer, more deeper GoLab conferences. Okay. No, but this is not a joke. I mean, GoLab conferences and all those things that are accelerating connections, because that's what I'm saying. We have the solutions. What is missing is accelerating these solutions. I mean, I made this long list of things that we have said. What is missing is accelerating these. And the boost are these incredible connections moments that we're having here. And the amazing professor from Singapore was saying this, no? He used the web metaphor. And that's exactly what we are doing. Now we are creating a new system, a new web. And these places, and everyone working in the sector to accelerate connection, to accelerate collaboration, partnerships, is creating this web. And that will be the fuel to actually scale all the things that we heard. Because the experience is there. The pilot cities are there. Stop pilot, let's think big. And here we are thinking big. We need more.
Incredible. Thank you, Rafa. So I think I've heard both Emil and you saying we need to go big. And we need bigger, deeper, and longer GoLab conferences. So, and I promise I had no idea that Rafa was going to say that, but I'm happy you did. Aneta, I feel like you're a disruptor at the conference, the person who's not afraid to be controversial, though I don't think any of our panelists are in any way afraid of that. What do you make of this cause to go bigger, bolder, given that you spend a lot of time, all your time, within big?
So I've
big
been introduced as a disruptor before, and when I heard that, I'm a
That's a
lifelong,
compliment.
I'm a lifelong bureaucrat. So when you hear that you're a disruptor, you basically just want to fall underground. What they're really telling you is you're a failed bureaucrat, right? And then I realized the person who introduces me is usually like a millennial, and that's cool. So I'm trying to embrace the disruptor label. I'm a lawyer by training. Disruptor lawyers, do they exist? I'm a fraud investigator, having done fraud investigations at the World Bank at the Global Fund for several years. I'm a risk management specialist. I'm the person who sets the compliance systems and says no to you. I basically have been the control compliance function for most of my career. And I'd like to just redefine for you what I will be speaking about. I'm not actually going to be speaking about how do we get outcomes-based financing scaled. I want to take a step back a little bit and ask the question that Supreme Audit agencies are asking or are being asked. And I'm going to quote for you because I'm a lawyer, so I quote things from the International Standards for National Audit Agencies for Performance Audits. Performance or audits and national audit agencies are meant to provide independent and objective, reliable examination of whether governments, their undertaking systems, operations, programs, activities are operating in accordance with the principles of economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. And for the purpose of this presentation, I'd like to focus on the word effectiveness within that triumvirate and suggest to you that when we talk about outcomes and impact and results, in audit speak, we mean effectiveness. So we can bridge the language, okay? So what I'd like to understand is, are we really engaging in effectiveness? Because it is my fundamental assumption is if there is a commitment to effectiveness, then outcomes-based financing would be one of the many consequential, obvious conclusions to that. So I'd like to start with a little analogy. You might have heard this little story before. So there are these two little fishies swimming through the ocean. They're baby fishies, and they're swimming together, and they're chit-chatting, you know, like babies do. And then like this old fish like swims up and says, "Hello, boys or girls or whatever. How's the water today?" And they like, you know, because they don't really talk to adults. Because kids don't. And they swim off, and then they're looking at each other, and they go, "What is water?" And I'd like to talk to you about the water in which we swim in publicly financed organizations. The stuff that we literally don't even know is our set of constraints. The stuff that's happening around us, which actually functions a little bit like gravity or pressure, that we kind of start to assume it is immovable. But as we lawyers know, laws are made by men and women now. And so they are movable. And the question is, what can we move that we are assuming we can't? That's the question I'd like to engage you on. There was a reference to positions and interests in the starting point. I'd like to actually kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and ask ourselves, like, when we look at all of the multiple players that comprise a public agency, because that's not one being, it's multiple beings. And we think about, I think we come into this whole thing of social, you know, services and impact thinking that everyone's got the same interest at heart, right? But if we are honest, and I have been having lots of conversations with all of you, not all of you, but many of you in this room and for years, I think in practice, we sometimes feel that the interests themselves are not aligned in practice. And I think those interests, if we had to be honest, we have the interests of leaders in government and in public agencies, which are really about staying elected, not about delivering. Spending within the budget, spending all the money, yeah. Avoiding criticism, we had that conversation in the trust conversation. And then there's the whole set of interests that are inherent to any bureaucracy, and that I would include also corporates, okay, bureaucracy inherent. So sticking with your narrow scope of responsibility, not stepping outside your silo. Only focusing on your risks and eliminating your risks without really understanding how your piece of the puzzle fits in with the bigger piece. Turf. Avoiding responsibility. Why not? Compliance. Certain faith that if everybody just does their piece, it'll all somehow come together. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the case. Are those not the interests? And is it not the case that more often than not, we're sitting inside, and I'm speaking now to my fellow bureaucrats in the room, don't we just sit there sometimes wondering, why is it that it's so easy to do the wrong thing, that the system actually makes us want to do the wrong thing, and it's so damn hard to do the right thing? When you have a system that makes it easy to do the wrong thing and hard to do the right thing, your system is broken. You've got to think through what needs to be changed in the system. And why is it that those of us who actually do go back to the principle of effectiveness, efficiency, and economy are considered the crazy people, like what Avnish said? So I think we're sitting, most of us in bureaucracies very often, feeling a cognitive dissonance that commonly breaks our souls, to be honest, where we're on the one hand sitting there saying we care about impact and results, and on the other hand, we really realize that we're caring about compliance, we care about avoidance of reputational risk, and we're deeply, deeply trying not to have to go through another stupid bureaucratic process that is about jumping through hoops. And if we can just avoid that, then goodness, couldn't we just do it easier? So I just laid that out for you because I just want to raise one thing. We often get criticized in outcomes-based, whatever, financing, results, that if we pay for something that matters, that will create perverse incentives, that will create gaming, that will create a lack of value for money, that will create inefficiency. I put to you now, and this to your point, Amel, we are already in an environment that creates inefficiency, that creates perverse incentives, and that creates massive inefficiencies. We're just not naming it. It is the dark waters we are swimming through. And we might be willing and capable of engaging in the cognitive dissonance ourselves, but the world will call that out, and it is calling it out. It's calling it out through the populism that's out there, which basically says, let's just do away with government. And it's doing away, as I think, Paola, you mentioned, with citizens avoiding taxes and with corruption. We can't actually avoid reality as much as we try and get very good at it. So good news. So that was the bad news. Now, good news. Good news. So I think there's actually a lot there. I think, first of all, there are crazy people. I mean, we're in the room here, right? That we are people who refuse to just buy into that narrative of the status quo narratives, and we're actually talking about let's get effectiveness back on the table. And the great thing is we're not the populists, right? We are the technical experts who have all of the competencies about what systems work like internally to actually put it together. And I think you put it beautifully. We kind of know. We just have to pull it together. So we have the people. We also are people who have identified moments in which it's possible to do it differently. So we're capable of starting to see the water in which we're swimming. We can vision a clear water system. We can vision and those elements that are there. So we are already ahead. And one third point that I wanted to say that we could pull from, and this is the compliance piece, I put to you that there are rules and standards already in place, like the one I just read you at the beginning, that are already in place that we're simply not leveraging well enough. This is not about revolutionizing and starting a communist system and throwing out capitalism. This isn't even about doing the paradigm shift that we're asking the private sector to do, which is to start going from a profit-making, shareholder model to a, stakeholder model for environment. This is nowhere near that level of a paradigm shift. We're just saying, do what your standards tell you to do. Align your funding and your systems to effectiveness, efficiency, and economy. That's what we're actually asking for. So it's all there. In fact, I'll tell you another one that I really love. It comes out of internal controls standards, international standards of internal controls design, enterprise risk management. Do you know what a control system is? It's anything that delivers efficient and effective objectives. There you are, objectives again. If you have a control system and a compliance system that doesn't get you efficiently and effectively to an objective, you don't have a good control system. That's actually what the standards say. So with all that in mind, I just wanted to say I have spent the last 20 years doing little I innovation, bottom up within the system, piloting, then proposing adjustments, building tools, training, talking with my colleagues, developing tools and systems for them. We just managed to actually rewire the whole operational policy for grant making in the Global Fund to introduce results-based contracting. It's actually about to go live. So anybody who takes money from us, talk to me. But that's little I innovation, and I can tell you it's not working enough. It's still not going to get us to scale. We need big I disruption. And I think it's an interesting question of how to do that. So in a past life, I used to work for Transparency International. And I got to look and take a look into the space of the activists, the people that push government, right? Not civil society as in the service providers, but civil society as in the activists who push. And I realized that there's kind of the bra burners, what I would call the ones that just, throw everything. It's kind of the, and then there's the people who really are technically sound and they're able to do analytical work that actually is so high quality that governments end up picking it up. And I'm proposing we introduce something like this. Because what I'm wondering is, can we create an external pressure point where we can create an incentive environment and also define what would need to change in these systems by which we can evaluate publicly funded agencies, so they can actually start being incentivized and also be told how to align their systems to make it easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing. So make that flip. And I'll tell you, this has been done, right? Like if you look at this, the big regulations in sustainability that have just come through in Europe, the CSRD, Corporate Social Responsibility Directive. If you look at what that actually is exactly what I'm describing for this, except only in sustainability for private sector. And it started as a self-assessment, and I think, Paula, you were mentioning this, right? Self-assessment in our previous session, criteria, which was basically saying, do you have the governance systems in place and the rules and the risk management systems and all the systems and infrastructure in place within your sort of upper echelons of your institutions to drive your systems to deliver change. And this became so credible that it actually was picked up by civil society and then as law. And now audits are going to be measured against that. So that's what I'm suggesting. I think we need to take an activist position, but not an activist as an irresponsible position, an activist as an independent checkpoint to create pressure, which the organizations themselves need and want. So I thought the cool idea would be to call it government outcomes lab standard, right? Because that's what it is. And I'll close by giving you concretely what I mean by something like this. Okay, so because it's nice to talk about something like that and you're like, what is she really talking about? So first of all, I just want to say I don't have all the answers. What I would like to actually say is if you're interested in this idea, talk to me afterwards so we can actually kind of throw this together, start throwing it together. But here's some idea. What if the standard had something like this? Just as evaluating whether the parliament or your board of oversight, your oversight board, has delivered a policy and a risk statement that states, among the 3 principles of value for money, effectiveness is always priority. And in fact, saying that you cannot actually achieve economy and efficiency if you haven't demonstrated that you have achieved effectiveness. There's no such thing as an economy if you haven't achieved effectiveness. What if you actually had policy statements that said that? And then asked for the systems to align within that. What that would do, I submit to you, is it would force a shift in risk appetite conversations at the corporate level, at the oversight level. It would shift the scope of responsibility of oversight committees. It would actually start asking the question, are we really engaging in efficient and effective systems internally? We could start actually evaluating our own internal compliance offices for how efficiently and effectively they're helping the programmatic teams deliver objectives, like a good control model. It would shift the way that silos within bureaucracies interplay. Who gets to trump the other? Who gets to have the final word? It would force our programmatic functions to think a little bit more about how to, rather than connect money to something that's nebulous and we don't know, maybe we would have to actually start thinking about how we do design through iterative learning, agility, innovation, and a focus on quality. And then it would also force our auditors and our controllers on the back end to actually audit for these questions and bring it right back to our oversight bodies. So that is my suggestion. And let me know what you think.
Wow. Aneta, there is a lot to unpack there. I wish we had at least another 90 minutes, but we have 11 minutes. I know, right? Time's flown by. We have Andy Burnham waiting. So let's take a few. I'm kidding. He's not actually waiting. I hope not. Let's take a few questions. I think there's a question online from James Ronicle. And GoLabbers can just read our minds. And I know he's been waiting patiently for a while to ask his question. So James, hello. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. Oh, there you are.
Hi, Andrea. Thank you, everyone, for such a lovely, inspiring and challenging panel session. My question was for Radana, and I totally agree with your analysis, by the way, in this inflection point that you described in 2019, 2020. My question is, has the ship sailed in a way? Like, do you think that there's an opportunity for that inflection point to come back around, or do you think it was a one-time opportunity that's gone now?
Yeah. No, I don't think it's sailed at all. I think, you know, we still have some of those enabling conditions there. So again, still there is a pipeline of great projects and development. Still, we've got a market of people who, for some reason, continue to be interested in this field, despite facing, well, what to me anyway has seemed like 5 years of just swimming through mud. You have this kind of increasingly big and bought-in community of practice who's willing to try different instruments, and we've heard so many of them presented at the GoLab conference over the past few days. So I think what's missing for us in particular right now, but it's probably a symptom of where we are in the political cycle, is that senior support and the buy-in. And we're really looking to understand in the UK what new ministers, what the new government is thinking with regard to, you know, outcomes-based delivery. Again, I've heard internally the term delivery unit mentioned more and more in recent weeks as well, right? So a focus on delivering outcomes. So certainly some of the rhetoric is already there. I think will it translate into practice is another thing. So yeah, I'm certainly still optimistic, and I hope the rest of you in the room are too. I think again, what we have today that we didn't, you know, even back then, is the evidence still streaming through from a large number of programs. And James, I know you and your team are responsible for producing quite a lot of that, including our DIBS pilot evaluation. So yeah, I think there's loads working in our favor. Again, let's not stop at just assuming fiscal challenges will stop us. Look at some of those institutional challenges too, and use the evidence wisely.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions online, GoLabbers? No? Okay, so we can take some questions from the room. Grace was very quick with her hand out, so let's go to her. Sorry.
Thank you, everybody. It's Grace Duffy from Bridges Outcomes Partnerships. And firstly, just what an extraordinary panel. Thank you so much. This is a great sort of end to the conference. And I'm a recovering bureaucrat myself, so just before coming to Bridges was a civil servant, and it strikes me that actually despite the evident and actually quite worsening social problems, at least, you know, in the UK, there is still like a dramatic underappreciation of the underperformance of our services, and actually the role that our traditional approach to policy making and to contracting and to delivery plays in that underperformance. So my question to the panel and to attendees, I suppose, as well, actually, is, you know, how do we demonstrate this? How do we make people understand the role of these methods in this underperformance and the effect of that? And if our decision makers, if the politicians aren't convinced by evidence, and I must say I've seen quite a lot of policy-based evidence making in my time as a civil servant, how do we convince the decision makers, right, to make the changes that you've suggested? And there's just a brief reflection, if I may, because I know time is tight, but you know, although the great complexity about so many of these challenges, there are actually quite a lot of relatively simple changes that we could make in the UK context, at least, which would really, really facilitate this. You know, we could move to more flexible, you know, cross-government budgets. That's not a hard thing to do. We could actually reform our really unnecessarily restrictive accounting practices. We could create an outcomes task force in the centre of government speech and everything. These are all things that we could do relatively simply, which would really, really facilitate this. And so the second question is, why aren't we doing it, I guess?
Amel, I think you wanted to come in.
I think going with the tool is the wrong thing, to be honest. Like when I think of my time as minister, and funny enough, when I think about the 2 big projects we've launched and we're working on 4 others, in Ghana, I met the president and told him something he said in a campaign, you know, meeting, and was like, you care about XYZ, and I can help you achieve that. I didn't even talk about an outcomes fund at all. And then he was like, okay, my chief of staff will call you. And I was like, I'm not gonna never hear back. Next morning, the chief of staff called me, you know? And then it went on, the Minister of Education went on. And Sierra Leone, actually, we had a concept study that said, it doesn't make sense to do an outcomes fund in Australia. But then we saw that like the minister there, David saying it had an education or an innovation challenge project, which was small, pilot, 50 schools, and was kind of ending, and he was super passionate about it, and then was again, it was a funny story. I pick up the phone, I call like the only person I know Australian is one I was on a board with, the only person. I was like, you know what, I'm trying to reach a guy called David Tanges, your Minister of Education. See, and he's like, okay, wait, I'm gonna pass the phone because we live together. But I mean, but like they didn't live together, it's kind of like they were next apartment on the floor. I don't know, like life is crazy. So he goes out of literally his apartment, walks to the other apartment, knocks at the door, and he's like, yeah, I have someone free on the phone, which was like a bit insane. But so, and again, I was like, look, I heard you're having this thing at heart. I think we can help you make this bigger reality. And again, we didn't talk about outcomes fund or outcome partnership at the time. And look, when I was cabinet minister, like, to be honest, like there were three things I cared about. There were three things I wanted really to get through. And I hired someone, and like you say it's hard, but you can get a lot through. I hired someone, my chef de cabinet. I hired basis on the criteria that someone who can go to the edge of bureaucracy. And I was like, you know what's the limit? I don't want to end up in jail. Okay, so that's the limit. Like I want you, and my prime minister, Madhijama, used to have this thing. He said, inside the law, outside the law, or something like outside the law, inside the law. Like it's kind of, I want to do everything possible, stretch our bureaucracy to the limit that I don't end up in jail. And for the three topics I really cared about, I got everything through. Everything. But obviously I had, to bribe the finance minister with dinners and, and help him in parliament with other things. But I mean, you get like, it was legal, it's just like you have to make kind of that extra effort, like we didn't break the law, but we kind of stretched that kind of bureaucracy. And other things that I didn't care so much about, to be honest, I didn't do it. Like I honestly, I give a very quick example. We had a big project where we support SMEs in tourism, okay? Biggest employer, 400,000 people. I did an evaluation, and the evaluation said that actually the SMEs who have been taking the support, the financial support and the consulting support are the ones that don't need it because they were the good ones already, and they probably could have been able to finance it yourself, but there is a government program, so why don't you? I mean, you would be stupid not to, participate in it or take it. And I was like, okay, let's kill this. It doesn't make sense. And then those who were so struggling, they didn't need that program. They needed like something, a bad debt bank. I'm not going to go in details. And then my head of com was like, I'm going to make a suicide if you do this today. She's like, it's going to be all over the media. They're going to say she killed this SME support. SME are our biggest employer in the countries. It's going to be headlined for weeks. No one is going to understand your techie evaluation thing, and it's going to distract from our strategy with the three topics, And I was like, okay, let me think. I was like this thing, oh my God, we're spending so much. Okay, we're not doing harm, so that's at least, but we're like, throwing literally money out of the window. And she came, like she was in the car. I was like, I don't have to talk to you. She was like, I'm in my car in front of your house. She's like, I'm not going to sleep until I can talk with you, And we talked like at 2 a.m. and she convinced me, and I didn't kill the program. And we were spending like, I don't want to say how much, every year on people who didn't need that money, but I just couldn't, like, I didn't have a big enough comm team to fight that battle in the media, and that's kind of the reality of a politician. So the question is like, while I believe like institution building, we have to do that. Like, let's look at what people really care about in UK and everywhere and tell them, I can help you achieve that thing. And then if outcomes partnership is the right thing, use it,
It's really eye-opening, Amel. Should we take one more very quick question? I will try to bring someone in whom we haven't heard before, so I'll go at the back. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Maarten Oranje. I work as a health financing expert at Cordate and also for the World Health Organization. One reflection and then a question. Reflection is that I think there is reason for some optimism. At least in health financing, we see actually that in the last 15 or 20 years, there have been multiple countries that have managed to institutionalize results-based financing. Rwanda is a famous example, but other countries in Africa like Burundi, Cameroon, Zimbabwe, they have made it government policy that performance-based financing is part of health financing domestically. And also outside of Africa, Argentina has a successful program, Estonia. I will keep it short. So I think there's reason for optimism, unless we think that this is maybe not sector agnostic. As in, okay, this might have worked in health in countries already 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but maybe it's more difficult in education for reasons that we haven't discussed today. Would it depend on the sector? Can we discuss institutionalization without discussing which sector we're talking about? So that's a question to the panel.
Anyone who wants to
discussing
take
it?
that,
It's the last
Nicole?
one.
Let's
Just
come
one
to you briefly, and then I'm afraid to say we will have to wrap up.
No, just one quick reaction that I agree that I think we are discussing a lot of contracting and procurement, and I think we need to take a more holistic view and include those where we integrate results-based financing and public financial management systems and flows with health facilities, but also the World Bank with lots of governments has been scaling performance-based intragovernmental transfers. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from that space. So that's just a reaction.
Thank you. Well, I suggest we leave it here because we are exactly at time. I knew that this panel is going to be incredible. I had absolutely no doubt, despite I know, Mel, you were a bit worried about us having this discussion at the end of the day. It has exceeded any expectations I could have ever had in any possible way. And I know I set out a tough ask. I ask you all to come up with solutions and really concrete ways forward. And you've learned that in an incredible way. So a huge, huge thanks to each one of you. And then from what I'm seeing, the reaction in your audience, I think the audience agrees as well. So thank you. Wow. And so we have a tiny bit of a break. So we're going to start the public talk at 5:30 UK time, really, really promptly. So those of you who are able to stay on, we can grab some coffee and then we'll come back here. Those of you who can't stay on, I just want to say a huge thank you. It's been such a privilege to be bringing you all together. It's just been so much fun. And I think you all know how hard the GoLab team has worked to put this together. So thank you. And if you're not staying on, I will let you know now the date for next year's conference. And because I promise you, I don't know, but they'll have to change the date if we clash. Yeah, it's 4th and 5th of September next year. The planning is probably already started. I don't know where Jess is. She's probably already thinking about next year. Thank you so much and hope to see as many of you in the public talk. Thank you.